describe what your current job is?
Sure. My current job is as a software engineering manager, and for that job, basically I work in a company where we make a software product. As a software development manager, my job is to work with groups of software engineers to help them know what software they should write, answer questions for them about how the product should work, and work with them on any kind of feedback on ways that they can improve the way they do their job. A lot of it comes down to deciding what we should do to make the product that we all work on better. And the way I choose what those employees should work on is by talking to people like our salespeople, people in our business development team, and sometimes talking to actual customers, hearing what they think we should do to make our product better. I basically take all of that input as ideas of things that we could do, then come to the software development team and ask my software engineers which of these things is easy, which of these things is quite hard, which of these things do they think they can't ever do, even if they had an infinite amount of time. And basically that allows me to rank which is the best opportunity that a number of customers want and it's not too hard to do. And then we work together to try to come up with a plan for how to make that feature. Often what ends up happening is we estimate the work that needs to be done, make a plan, and then present that plan either to my own management team or back to our product or business people and say, this is what we think we can do and this is how long we think it will take. And they give us feedback on that, like, is it worth doing? Or is it going to be soon enough for when the customer needs it? Things like that. And with all of that information, we make a plan. There's more to a job of a software development manager, though, than just working with a team and having them develop software. I also am responsible for building a team, and what I mean by that is I have to hire software engineers to be on the team to do the work, and that involves writing a job description, working with people who help me to post it on job searching websites or things like that, reviewing resumes from software engineers who are looking for a job, interviewing those people, so sitting down, like preparing a set of questions that I would ask to try to understand their technical skills, their people skills, like how well they're going to be able to get along with people, as well as maybe their ability to manage commitments or work in a stressful environment. So there's a number of aspects about being a software development manager. Another aspect in addition to hiring people is working with them after I've hired them. So provide feedback on how they're doing with their job, talk with them about ways they can improve what they're doing. In some cases I have to share feedback, perhaps complaints that I've heard from their coworkers about things they need to do differently. So in many cases I end up in that role in the middle, trying to give feedback in a constructive way that will allow people to improve the work that they do, hopefully not pissing them off so much that they'll either just be upset all the time or quit and go work somewhere else, but also firm enough that they improve the work that they do. Additionally, I'm also responsible for providing feedback on employees' performance, and that includes things like whether they should be promoted to a higher level, whether their salary should be adjusted, whether they should get a raise, or sometimes other forms of compensation like stock options or other things. So as a software manager, your role is to make sure people know what they need to do, they know how to do it, they know what they do, and they get feedback on what they do. But at this point in my career as a software development manager, the one thing I don't do is I don't write any software. So it's kind of funny. Like, I went into this business and tried to I was interested in writing software and working with computers, but now my job is to basically talk about writing software, talk about what software to write, but I don't actually do the software development or software coding myself. Anyway, that gives you kind of a high-level description of what I do and what my job as a software development manager is about.
What did you have to do to become a software engineer?
To become a software engineer, I started by going to university. I studied at the University of Victoria, and I entered a Bachelor's of Engineering program. That was a 5-year program at UVic, where I both did some work experience, co-op programs, and I also studied coursework. So it was about 4 years of academic coursework and just under 2 years of work experience combined. That gave me the education to start, But after that, I had to get a job in industry. I applied and eventually found a job, my first job out of school, working for a company in Vancouver doing software development. To become a software engineer, I found out it was really more about the job experience that I learned on the job, more than like studying the math course or studying physics or chemistry at university. So in a lot of ways, I became a software engineer through writing code for a company as a software developer. So it's almost like an on-the-job experience thing. So that's how I became a software engineer.
What are the possible career paths for a software engineer?
Well, the possible career paths for a software engineer, there's sort of two major paths. One is to stay as a technical professional and try to advance on the technical ladder, and the other is to switch into management, managing people. And that's a choice that people make usually like after at least 5 years of work experience, maybe a bit more. For myself, I ended up choosing to become a manager, in part because I found it quite rewarding to work with people and help ensure that we were all working on the most important thing, or help ensure that we worked together to make a system that worked. I found that more fun than just working by myself on a hard technical problem. And I also felt like it gave me an opportunity for advancement, to take on more responsibility at a company, to get a position that paid well so that I could afford other things in life, like buying a home or being able to provide for a family. So that was a choice I made. But I've worked with many engineers who choose to stay on the technical path, and some of those can advance from a junior engineer to an intermediate engineer to a senior engineer, in some cases to a principal engineer or a technical director or a research fellow. Those are very senior technical roles, but there's not very many opportunities for the most senior technical roles. But those are the basic choices in terms of career path.
What are the typical salaries for engineers at different levels of experience?
Well, I can't speak to the salaries at everywhere because I don't know, but I can talk about things through my own experience. What I'm seeing now for a newly graduated software engineer who's getting their first job out of university, they probably have a starting salary of around $60,000 to $65,000 a year, which is about $30 an hour, something like that, or $32 an hour. That seems to be, roughly speaking, the starting wage these days. As an engineer who's working as a technical contributor, so as like a junior software engineer, through intermediate, through staff engineer or senior engineer, the salary can, as I say, start at about $60,000 a year and go up to, I'd say maybe $130,000 or $140,000 a year at those levels. The salaries for managers and directors of companies and vice presidents of engineering, those jobs can go probably up to, I'm going to guess, around $200,000 a year. So that's kind of the salary range. It starts out pretty decent compared to a lot of jobs, and you can be fairly well paid. That's if you work for a company. If you start your own company and make an app like Angry Birds before anybody else thought of it, you can make a large amount of money and be a millionaire. But that's riskier to try to do your own thing, but it can be more financially rewarding. So that gives you an idea.
What are the best and worst parts of being a software engineer?
Well, maybe I'll start with what I think of as the best things about being a software engineer. And I guess one of the things I'll start with is the reason I went into software engineering in the first place, is that I enjoy working with technology, working with computers, building interesting things. And so by working in software engineering, I get to spend my days doing something that I enjoy. Another thing that I like about being a software engineer is that I like decent technology, like laptops or tablets or other things. And so as part of my job, I actually am provided nice equipment, decent new stuff that works well. And so I get to spend my time using tools that I like. And I guess another big thing that I enjoy and appreciate is the work environment. I work in a pretty decent office. It's a nice location. The people that I work with are all well educated. They're polite. Generally, everybody's trying to help each other, so it's a positive environment. So I consider all of those things to be really quite good, and I think that the compensation's pretty decent. So I can live a decent lifestyle. So all of those I think of as sort of the best things about being a software engineer. Maybe one other one that's been quite useful recently is that to some degree I can set my own hours, so I can choose to start earlier in the day and come home a bit earlier, or some of my coworkers choose to start later in the day and come home later. And one of the reasons why that's an advantage is in my home life I wanted to participate in my kids' sports activities, coaching their ice hockey teams and doing things like that. And it was really nice to have that flexibility. If they had a 5 o'clock in the afternoon practice, I could make sure I could leave work in time to come and coach their team, or things like that. So having that flexibility is also quite a nice benefit that not all career paths have. So I'd say that the worst thing about being a software engineer would have to be situations where the job can be quite stressful. There's a couple different ways that can happen, but one common thing that happens quite often is that you have to try to find a solution to a problem. And sometimes that means you have to invent a new way of doing something, or there's a problem in your software and you have to track down the problem and try to figure out what's wrong. Sometimes the software that you're working with can be very complicated and it can be quite difficult to figure out the problem. So that can be stressful, but that's also rewarding when you solve problems. But there's another type of stress can be quite a bit worse, and that's when we agree as a group to deliver a project in a certain amount of time, and we end up with a deadline. We have to finish by a certain date, and then as we start working on the project, things can go wrong, or things can be more difficult than we expected. And in those cases, there can be a lot of pressure to finish by the date that we promised anyway. And that can turn into pressure to work overtime, to work evenings, to work weekends, to try to get to a solution. And that can be pressured and stressful. In the most extreme case that I've had along those lines was when we had a project to deliver a telecommunication system for a company in Mexico. And with that solution, the deadline was a particular time in the future, and we had to deliver a working system. We ran into a problem, and it looked like we were going to be late delivering that system. For that contract, there was a penalty. For every day that we were late was a $1 million fine for my company. The pressure to deliver that system on time was enormous, and that turned into a lot of pressure to work nights, to work weekends, to cut corners, to find any way to finish in the amount of time required. I'd have to say that was probably one of the most stressful times in my career, and that, I think, would be one of the worst things about being a software engineer.
Is it true that all software engineers are extreme introverts?
No, it's not true that all software engineers are extreme introverts. It is true that software engineering is a pretty good career path if you are somewhat of an introvert, and I do work with quite a few people who I think prefer to work on their own solving problems than dealing with people, especially annoying people. There are definitely introverts that I work with, but to say that they're all extreme introverts would be like a big time gross oversimplification and isn't true. But if you are an introvert, it's not a bad career choice.